but the mandates and the changes that have come down
Yep.
has made it very difficult for teachers to teach their kids. And I just want to give you one example that she's talked to me a lot about. For several years, her first probably 10 years as a teacher, she was able to literally ask for more kids in her room with special needs because she likes to work with kids with special needs. But then when they start grading teachers and grading them on their overall performance, it makes it impossible for a teacher to say, hey, I'll take more students with individualized plans. Because that brings their classroom down overall.
Yep.
And this report card makes them look like they're not as productive as other teachers because they've taken on more children with special needs. So those kind of things, I think, have really made it hard for teachers. And I'll tell you, I really believe we've got a lot of discouraged teachers in this state. And I've talked to young people who don't even want to go into the teaching profession now because of some of this stuff.
Yeah, several things, Mark. Number one, even this legislature, as backward-looking as it is, it's begun to dawn on them that they've created some monstrous, grotesque elements in terms of how we handle K-12 education in the state. And they're starting to want to roll back some of this very heavy and oppressive monitoring and testing that's going on, that's really hamstringing teachers, is what they tell me, to be able to teach the way they know how to teach. And what you're describing is in line with that. You know, the report cards for schools are not well thought out. It's not even clear to me what the purpose is, but they're cartoonish. They don't recognize, as you say, that if you have a more difficult student population, the school's going to look bad. What you should be trying to understand is how you're adding value over the course of their education, and that's a better measure. There are things we can do, I think, on a bipartisan basis to reform that. We've had all this standardized testing being added and added and added, and none of it is ever taken away. I mean, it's a great example of over-regulation, and the Republicans have been behind it all the way. You remember it was Gene Watts who first brought that into the legislation. And they keep adding things, and they never take anything out, and it's just, you know, it's ridiculous how much standardized testing we now do in our schools, and how much depends on it, and how much the teachers are forced to really just teach to that test and not really bring out, you know, the nurturing that they tend to want to do with their kids. And I know that's what teachers are really like, if they're given the chance. I mean, they reach into their own pocket, you know, day in and day out, and pay for things for their students just to make sure their students have what they need if they're not otherwise being provided. That's the generous nature of our teachers. And by the way, teachers have always been highly respected members of the community. I have said to all the teachers unions have endorsed Betty and me this year, and I've said to them, if you just get out with your respect that you have in the community and with your voice, and you run this like one big levy campaign across the state, which is what it really is, kind of, we will win this hands down, because teachers are respected, teachers and coaches, and people know how much difference they make in the community. And we need to get back to making it clear again in the state of Ohio that we honor that service, that is true public service, and they are raising an awful lot of kids. And in the opioid, ravaged communities where kids are being raised by grandparents if they're handy, but by nobody really if they aren't handy, the school districts are taking on more and more. They're really being heroic, but they've reached a breaking point, and we need some reform. Yeah.
I was wondering if we could go a little bit deeper into what you and Aaron were talking about. This is the issues of poverty and opportunity are something I'm really focused on in my campaign and concerned about for the folks in my district. And especially in places like Coshocton comes to mind, where this is a community where there was thriving industry and people were building good middle class lives, and then the industry left, the drugs came in, and people are in kind of this desperate situation where they don't have opportunity, but they have this hometown pride. They love where they're from. They've been there for generations. They want to stay. You know, the location isn't great. It's not really near a major highway. It's not great for big transportation. And so I think it's really, I want to know what we can do for communities like that to help them be able to stay where they are and raise their families there and be able to grow opportunities for them. And I'm looking for insight into that problem for communities like that. And I'm wondering if you have any insight or ideas about what some solutions might be for communities like that. And I'm wondering if you think that sustainable energy solutions might be something for communities like that, but I'm curious what your ideas are specifically for places.
Yeah,
like that.
I think there's a number of things, and I talked about a number of them already, but I'll repeat if you'd like. But I think if we rebuild infrastructure in the state, that's good jobs. They're all by definition community-based jobs, local jobs, and that gives us something to show for it, as opposed to that tax bill where they spend all this money and what did they build? What tangible has come out of that? It's not clear to me. Part of this is reversing the tax policies at the state level, the state legislature, which has all been about reducing income tax and cutting income tax. That favors the wealthiest Ohioans. It does not help the middle class very much. It's supposed to trickle down. It is the old trickle down theory. But what's trickling down is the cuts in services at the local level, which affect families in all of our communities. So changing the tax policies in terms of what the state has pursued is important. Supporting our small businesses, who do tend to be spread out throughout the state, is important, and we can do a lot of job growth through that. 2 out of 3 new jobs is created by small businesses, and if they get timely financing and infusions, then they can really move forward. Sustainable energy is another one. The legislature's turned its back on that, has really slowed down the growth of wind and solar in Ohio. I have no idea why they think that makes sense. The rest of the country, the rest of the world are all moving in that direction. There's good jobs in it. The building of wind turbines, the construction, installment, maintenance of those, and of solar panels, where we had made a start in the state and we had aggressive renewable energy goals, and they've kind of walked them back, frozen them, slowed them down. We need to turn again into the future and move forward into the future. And that can go hand in hand with infrastructure. We could install solar panels. As one of my primary opponents said, it was a good idea, picking it up, on all of our public buildings. And we can do wind turbine farms in parts of the state that are additive. Many farmers could have wind turbines on their property. They can farm right underneath them, but it's extra income. And it also provides more sustainable energy for the state. There are businesses from around the country, big companies, that want to go places where they know they can depend on the fact that there is clean, renewable energy available at a steady, predictable cost far into the future. That's what Amazon is getting the benefits of a wind farm up in northwestern Ohio. And they're happy to locate there because they have that. GM is just locating, there's a wind farm being developed that's going to power GM facilities. There are other companies that are going to want to do that. So why Ohio isn't moving into the future and claiming our share of those jobs and being aggressive about it, as opposed to what we are doing, which is nonsense, really. We're defending the status quo and not even moving along with the markets is beyond me. I think there's quite a number of things we can do, and workforce developments through the community colleges and investing in our community colleges is part of the answer as well. And they tend to be spread out throughout the state. But yeah, on my mind very much in this economic opportunity tour is Ohio is made up of lots and lots of small and medium-sized communities. I mean, Newark is one. Now you're in the greater central Ohio market, which tends to be a privileged market, let's face it. A lot of good things going on here. But you get to the Coshoktons and the Zanesvilles and the Chillicothe's and the Marions and the Mansfields, those are the places that we need to focus, and it's a lot of the things I just talked about that I believe can help propel the economies in those areas. All ideas are welcome, and we will work at this, but we will work with an intensity and focus and bring their voice to Columbus, where it has not really been heard effectively for quite a few years. Yes?
So Ohio made national news earlier this week with the Supreme Court's decision on voting rights. I wanted to know, what is your plan to keep Ohio voter rights a priority?
Yeah. So look, we have a Secretary of State, and he's running on their ticket, who is the source of all of that voter purging and defended it all the way up to the Supreme Court. And as I said about the ruling, that just because the Supreme Court says you can do something doesn't mean you should, or doesn't mean it's right, or doesn't mean it's the right direction for us. And he's now said that they will not purge any more voters before the election this fall because they don't want to have a political problem, but he hasn't said they aren't going to stop purging voters after this fall. So my view is, and I think the governor could solve this problem very simply, which is We have the BMVs across the state, and people go and renew their driver's licenses every 5 years. You have to do that. You update all your information when you do that. I know we had a governor candidate a couple years ago who didn't have a driver's license, but that's not very common in society, and that causes a problem. But everybody goes and renews their driver's license information every 5 years, so it's all updated. At the same time, we can incentivize all the registrars to say you have to register everybody who comes in when they renew their information to vote, and get them all registered to vote. Then people can decide whether they want to vote when it comes to an election, but they won't be blocked by the fact that, gee, they didn't go through this hoop of registering. So we can have that be done. And then there's no reason to purge voters because you have updated everybody's information relatively recently, somewhere between 0 to 5 years ago. I mean, the purging is an extra system that's laid on top of this system that Republicans usually would say is something like waste, fraud, and abuse in government, right? Why do you need two systems to do it? There's only one reason they want another system, because it's to knock voters off the rolls that they believe are the inattentive Democratic voters or minority voters. I mean, that's what the statistics show, and that's what they're doing. It's very cynical. But if I'm governor, we won't need any of that. We won't need to do any of that, and I will argue the case strongly, although we'll get a better secretary. If I'm governor, we'll have Kathy Clyde as Secretary of State. Yeah, yes, sir.
I grew up in a law enforcement family household, proud union family. And I'm curious about your ideas to bridge what I consider two important constituencies of the Democratic Party, which are law enforcement, union families, and communities of color. And we know that they're growing apart. I'm wondering if you have ideas of how here in Ohio maybe we can set the model.
That's a great question, and as we've all seen in the last few years, although really we've seen it for a long time, although people didn't want to see it longer ago, it's a long-standing issue because there is a lot of mistrust and suspicion, and there have always been a certain number of incidents. It's just that they were not as visible in the older days. They're very visible now with cell phone cameras and with CCTV, and a lot of law enforcement officers increasingly are wearing the portable cameras or dashboard cameras. So we're seeing more of it. Look, this is just an age-old problem. It has to be solved with better training, better handling of these situations. When I was Attorney General, we instituted crisis intervention training at the Peace Officer Training Academy to help people understand that, in some situations they're dealing with people with various degrees of mental illness, and not to be afraid of that and not to react in some, fashion, but to get experts to help you deal with those situations. People just, sometimes they make bad decisions. It's gonna happen, all right? We can't excuse it, but it does happen. And law enforcement is a tough job where you're having to react on the spot in sometimes dangerous situations and make split-second decisions. We have to be somewhat understanding of that, and yet we're seeing examples. We're seeing them with our own eyes, where it's very clear that this is something that's happening is inexcusable. And when that happens, we need to hold people accountable, and they need to be held responsible. That's got to be part of this. To solve for racial problems in America, which have existed for as long as we've been Americans, and to do it in a responsible way takes time, takes effort, takes understanding on all sides. Leadership matters in terms of how we speak about these issues and how we handle these issues, but I don't think it's easily solved just by, I don't have a magic answer for it. I think it's something we have to work at over time. I will say that, as I said, the tone that you set in government and in leadership matters. I mean, right now we have a tone being set by the White House, which is absolutely against everything I've understood for America. Trying to find people to scapegoat and blame, that's like Nazi Germany. I mean, I don't want to make too strong a point about it, and I don't want to compare it to the Holocaust, but it is trying to find people that we can knock down and drag down and blame and say it's their fault, not our fault. That never builds people up to knock somebody else down. When our kids do it on the playground, we tell them stop that. That's not a good tone. We want to uplift people and bring people together and foster more tolerance and understanding of one another. I think that's what we need to do, and I think it will help us address this issue and many other issues. Yeah.
Last week, Tuscarawas County Schools passed an ordinance allowing concealed carry in the school for teachers. As governor, would you support keeping schools across the state gun-free zones?
So concealed carry for teachers?
Correct, they allow
Okay.
concealed
Yeah.
carry within this, the
There's
confines of
a
the school.
variety of school districts in the state that are handling this issue differently from one another. And I'm not sure whether there's one top-down solution from Columbus that's the right answer or not. Right now, there's a legislature that when they provide these kind of top-down solutions, I think they tend to go the wrong way on them. What I have said, I said in the primary, I'll say it in the general, is we need to work to reduce the gun violence in our society, and that involves tightening the gun laws in certain specific respects. It means having better school safety plans, and that's not been part of my plan, but there are some districts where maybe in a more rural area, they feel that the response time is slow enough that maybe something like that is needed. I think most teachers think that's not helpful, and that's what I've been hearing across the state. And I think there's much that we can do from the governor's office, working with law enforcement to reduce the violence in our cities and on our city streets, gang violence, violence with guns. I think that's all part of this if we're gonna save lives. So that's part of what I wanna do, and I will work with the legislature where I can, but I will work with law enforcement where I can, and we'll work on these issues. But, we will see how all of this transpires over time.
It's my understanding that most of the mental health folks that are incarcerated or institutionalized are in jails, not mental hospitals. Is that endemic in Ohio or all over the country?
Well, this is a subject that I think is gonna be on the ballot this fall. And it's not mental health solely, but it's drug possession offenses that are nonviolent, not drug dealing, but just drug possession. If you look at the statistics, the vast majority of people who end up going to jail or prison for drug possession are African American, and it is part and parcel of the disparities in our system. There's going to be a ballot measure on this fall, I believe, that will take those felony 5 low-level nonviolent drug possession offenses and turn them from felonies into misdemeanors, which would mean a number of things that are important. Number one, those people would no longer be going to jails and prisons. They'd be getting treatment in the community, which is the right answer. These are addiction problems. That's not really a criminal problem. Number two, people who are in the jails and prisons could be released because these are misdemeanors, and that would be retroactive. Number three, the people who come out of the system would now potentially be able to pass background checks to get hired for jobs, potentially apply for student loans, potentially seek occupational licenses to cut hair or do whatever, and they would have futures. Right now, what we're doing that's so short-sighted is we're taking a lot of these people, and it's true of the mentally ill as well, the course of least resistance is to get them in a jail or a prison, just to get them off the street. Then they're introduced to the criminal element. Then they have things on their record that mean when they come out they have no future. How's that good for them, or good for our communities, or good for their families? I mean, we need to take a step forward on this and recognize we're spending a lot of money very unwisely, and we are actually hurting ourselves and wasting a lot of people's lives. So, and some of that has to do with cuts in local services, so there's less mental health treatment and less drug addiction treatment at the local level, and this is the sort of inevitable answer to it, and it's not good for us. So I could take maybe one or two more, and then I'd probably have to go. So yeah.
This is a short educational statement for everybody that's running for state office. I'm the deputy registrar for this county for the Bureau of Motor Vehicles.
I can't hear you.
I'm the deputy registrar for the Bureau of Motor Vehicles in Newark.
Register them to vote.
Yes, well,
Yeah.
it's a requirement that when we do a driver's license or ID that we have to ask you to vote, or have to ask you whether you want to vote. If you want higher percentages, you need to make it an opt-out situation. Where people would say,
That's what
no,
we'll do.
I don't want to vote. And make it the onus on the person to not want to.
This is what the motor voter law was supposed to do in the first place. It
Right.
just never has been implemented all that aggressively in Ohio. Yeah.
But the reason why I'm stepping up is, in 1989, the deputy registrar system was changed from a political patronage position to a position that is a competitive bid process Each deputy registrar is a small business. The business that's here in Newark is my business. I employ the employees. We do not get tax money from anybody in the state of Ohio. We collect a service fee for every transaction that we do. That's how I pay my rent. That's how I pay my employees. That's how I pay for all the supplies that are used in my office. I pay for that. The service fee that we collect is $3.50 per transaction. It has been $3.50 per transaction since 2001. 18 years, we have not received an increase in our fees. My rent, just since 2010, has increased from $1,900 to $2,400. My insurance plan that I had for my employees has gotten so expensive I had to cancel it. So what I did was helped my employees that needed the insurance to get on Obamacare and gave them a rent to cover the portion of the premiums that I was paying before.
Can you
That may
kind
be
of
going on.
speed this up a little bit?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to say, everybody that's running for state office, please get a hold of me so I can educate you about how this system works so that we can keep the system viable. Otherwise, it's really on the verge of collapse. We got a fee passed this year. They gave the authority to the registrar to increase the fees. The president of the Senate pressured him not to do it. He gave us nothing. So another year that we have gotten no fees. It's getting to the point I can't keep employees. And I pay more than probably 99% of the offices in the state.
Mhm.
But please, if you're running for a state office, get a hold of me so we can talk about this situation.
Okay. We just heard from you. Yes, did you have a question?
So this is going back to the healthcare. So I also am very strongly passionate about affordable and accessible healthcare to everyone. And I know Bernie mentioned the Medicare for All plan, and I was wondering if you supported that and if you were bringing it or implement it in Ohio.
So we talked about that earlier,
Yeah, with
and you know, if people want to show me a plan where they can show me how you pay for universal health care on a state-by-state basis, I would be glad to look at it. I have never seen one. I've seen it operate on a nationwide basis, and it's been proposed in the Congress. Unless or until I see that, I think we have to do the best we can with what we have. And there's a lot of things we can do to improve the system that we have, and to make sure that we're keeping the Medicaid expansion in Ohio, which if we lose it, I think will be just a disaster for the state. Yeah, and that's what Mike DeWine is prepared to do, because he is so deeply into the ideology of opposing Obamacare, which he has done since he first ran against me in 2010, that he's not going to climb down with that, no matter how many people it hurts. And he has this secret plan of how he would overhaul it. It's much like the repeal and replace nonsense that we saw out of Washington. When push came to shove, they didn't have a replace. They didn't have any real ideas. And all they've done is mess up healthcare for a lot of people and put nothing workable in its place. So, all right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.